Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to see everyone, and thank you for being here for this conversation. My name is Adam Farrar. I work for Bloomberg Economics, and I'm excited to have this conversation today with Nicholas Moore. He has had many roles over the years, but currently sits as Australia's Special Envoy for Southeast Asia, and we're really happy to have you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Adam. It's a delight to be here, and I'm delighted so many people are here to listen to this conversation.
Absolutely. So before we dive into questions, I thought it would be helpful to take a look at a couple charts that your team was so kind to share with us.
Yep.
These help kind of lay out the argument you put forward in your strategy that you have sitting right here, Australia's Southeast Asia Economic Strategy for 2040, laying out the challenges ahead.
Yep.
And the first one being this question of trade with Southeast Asia between Australia and the region that, while growing, has not grown at the pace of the rapid growth of economic prosperity in Southeast Asia. And then if we go to the next chart, we have an opportunity to take a look at the other more blinding problem, which is investment, which has, despite this growth in the region, has remained relatively anemic and, in fact, in some ways has started to fall. And we're looking here at 2024 numbers, and we're seeing Southeast Asia in a combined ASEAN economy of over $4 trillion with just 2.5% of investment, while New Zealand, a GDP of $250 billion, receiving 4.7% investment. So with that in mind, we sit here 2 years since the rollout of your strategy and 1 year since the Australian government put forward a $2 billion investment facility to help drive investment in the region. How do you assess where we are today? And are there some examples you can share with the group on where things have succeeded and where you see more work needs to be done?
Sure. Well, it's always a question of, as we heard in the previous presenters, short-term and long-term. Short-term, there's good news that the exports, two-way trade, export-imports are up $6 billion over the last period of time. As a percentage of our total trade, that's 0.5%. So they've gone from 15% of two-way trade to 15.5% of two-way trade. So that's positive from a trade viewpoint. From an investment viewpoint, we've seen $2 billion of additional investment from Australia into the region. Now that's short-term. More importantly is the longer-term story. Now this report we provided to the government, it was provided to a government that wanted to increase two-way trade and investment between Australia and the region. So it started from the point of view of not us pushing against a closed door, the opposite. The government was saying to us, how do we increase two-way trade and investment? We made 75 different recommendations, and of those 75 recommendations, 50 have been implemented in part or whole. Now these are recommendations that will have a long-term impact in terms of two-way trade and investment between Australia and the region. Now they're being implemented, so over the last 2 years, those recommendations have been implemented and we're seeing the impact of those. So for example, today I'm with a delegation of investors from Australia here in Malaysia looking at opportunities. That delegation is one of 21 different delegations of Australian investors and corporations coming to the region. So by year's end, we will have over 500 different senior business leaders travel to the region looking at the opportunities available. The second thing we recommended was having well-known Australian business leaders take ownership of individual countries to promote investment there. So here in Malaysia, we have Tony Lombardo. Tony is with us here today. He's the CEO of a well-known Australian company called Lendlease, has been carrying on business here in Malaysia for 40 years. He is working to spread the message of Malaysia with all the Australian investors and Australian corporations. So we have 10 Tony Lombardos. So we have my former colleague, Shamara Wickramayaka, who's the head of Macquarie Group, who's taking that role in the Philippines. We've got the former head of the Business Council of Australia, who's taken that role for Indonesia, and so on and so forth. So, and that takes a while. So we're doing quite a lot in terms of raising awareness. Secondly, we're removing barriers to business leaders, particularly from the region, going to Australia. So people complained about visas, people complained about, we heard about it here actually, regulatory blockages. The government set up a single door for investors to come into Australia, and similarly has provided 5-year business visas into Australia to make it a lot easier. That's a long-term story as well. Thirdly, we talked about removing barriers, and removing barriers from an Australian viewpoint with the region, not barriers, sorry, building capability, which is about skills development. Now at the moment, here in Malaysia, 500,000 Malaysians have qualifications from Australian universities, 500,000. Long dated, so going all the way back to the 50s, we had something called the Colombo Plan. The government's doubling down in terms of how it provides education either through the universities or additional scholarships. Indeed, we've got an Australian Asian Centre now set up in Canberra to help develop those scholarships. So we have a whole range of new scholarships. All of this is long-term. You know, training people has a long-term payoff. And finally, as you mentioned before, we have the export finance facility, which normally is to promote exports, has actually been turned around to promote investments in the region and actually imports from the region to Australia. So it's been flipped around. $2 billion facility has been provided. Export Finance Australia has facilitated almost $1 billion worth of investment already in the region, and it's got a lot more activity. And the Prime Minister today at our business breakfast announced 2 additional investments supported by EFA of Australian businesses coming here into the region. So at the moment there's been 3 investments supported by EFA, all in fund managers. So there's a Singapore fund manager that focuses on clean energy. There's an Australian fund manager that focuses on credit. And there's another Australian fund manager that focuses on PPP. So the sort of projects we heard about before. They've all been given capital by the Commonwealth on the point of view they will crowd in other Australian investors, which of course that's equity. You have debt coming in on top of it for various amounts of these funds. So the impact that's been calculated is about 10 times the actual size of the government's ticket in terms of just the equity/debt investment together with the underlying leverage in the project. So already that's having an impact. Now these things, as I've mentioned, are longer term. The other element that is just has only had its 1-year anniversary is this idea of deal teams. So there's 28 different people who are now working for the Australian government across the region, whose job it is to assist Australian businesses wanting to invest in the region. Now they're very active. They've identified $20 billion worth of businesses and projects for Australian companies in terms of wanting to invest here. So that's all longer term. There's quite a lot of other initiatives we talk about in the report here, but they're the longer term elements. And of course, the whole thing we're talking about is long term. Australia has last year celebrated 50 years as a partner for Asean. We've always been a very close partner to Malaysia and all the other countries in the region, and that closeness, that neighbourliness underpins all this. We understand this is a very long-term endeavour, and everybody's focused in terms of how we build that two-way relationship going forward.
Thank you. I think it's really helpful to better understand kind of how you're laying out the value proposition on both sides for investment and ties, given the rather full environment of other partners that are investing in the region, absolutely. Right? Whether it be China, the EU, or the United States. So I think laying that out, and particularly the cultural and education ties, never mind the forward-leaning investment apparatus that are being set up to push on both sides. To pivot a little bit, we've just talked a lot about how Australia has been working to engage in setting out a strategy for the long term. But there's no way to hide from the fact that over the last 8 months, we've seen a seismic shift in the global geopolitical and economic order. As we look at the rise of U.S. tariffs, the U.S.-China trade war, there are questions about how and whether the normal engagements and strategies that have been put in place in the past are still valid. So I pose that question to you. At a strategy that was pulled together 2 years ago, do you feel it's still up for the task of pushing forward for Australia in engagement in this region, given this new environment that we're facing today?
Yeah, absolutely. And in fact, I'd say it's even more important today than it was when it was launched. And I think it's important always when we talk about current concerns to try to always put a bit of perspective around it. When the report was done, or shortly after the report, obviously COVID had been the biggest impact on people's mind. And COVID, if you were in business, was just a huge impact in terms of supply chains that were just cut off. And the impact that had to every business I was involved in was just stunning. Not just the fact that the supply chain was cut off, but then people had to fly, freight in, prices went up. The whole world went crazy from a commerce viewpoint for a very long period of time. So, that COVID era, frankly, seems more shocking, even in retrospect, than what we're dealing with today. And obviously we've come through it. But coming through the COVID period, I think everybody came away with the need to reduce risk through diversification of supply chains, and of course Australia saw particularly diversification of markets. Now, we had Mark Carney talking here yesterday about the importance of Canada diversifying away from the US, saying it wanted to have 50% of its trade in this region. So COVID taught us, both sides, I think, the importance of diversification, that the markets were cut off in China, but also the supplies from China were cut off. So it was very clear in our mind. And what we're viewing today, if anything, is far less in terms of an interruption. So I think it's at least as relevant today as it was back then. The only other point I'd make, of course, is that we do, availability bias is a thing for all of us humans. We all do focus very much on the short-term challenges, but the underlying drivers of our businesses and our economies are unbelievably robust, as we've seen. If we look at, notwithstanding the sound and fury that we see day to day in just the daily news, the world since the Second World War has been growing at a very constant pace of between 3 and 3.5%. Occasionally with COVID it drops. 2009 it dropped, but basically it's extremely robust. So we are going through some challenges now, but we always are going through challenges. I am very confident, personally, that not only will this region continue to grow, notwithstanding any of the trade sanctions, but indeed the rest of the world will continue to grow. Now, I think that the growth, you probably know this, the growth for the world has been dropped probably from 3.4 to 3.1% or something for the year. And for next year, it's going to be 3.3. It's the differences we're talking about. It's like 0.3% or 0.2% in terms of what people know today. Now, it could go anywhere, of course. We shouldn't be complacent. We shouldn't at all be complacent. But the world is robust. What we saw coming out of COVID is new supply paths, new markets were created on a regular basis. The world will continue to adapt to the situations that it finds itself in.
So to build on something you touched on there, this idea of that clearly has emerged now as well as in COVID is diversification, and how it's driving both a search for new markets, new industries. When over the past several weeks and years now, we've seen an increasing focus among the business community and government leaders on rare earths and critical minerals. And inherently, Australia and Southeast Asia play a large role in the current supply chain, but also potentially an even larger role in the future supply chain. We've seen in just the past week, the United States and Australia sign an $8.5 billion rare earth and critical minerals deal. And then yesterday, a surprise with the United States announcing critical minerals deals with Thailand and Malaysia as well, although not necessarily as deep and substantive. With that in mind, can you talk a little bit about how you see Australia's current approach, potentially driving cooperation in this sector, and whether critical minerals are an area or an opportunity for broader cooperation long term?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it comes back to the point I was making before about COVID. It's another example of how the world adapts to challenges. Critical minerals, as you say, they're in Australia, they're here in Malaysia, they're in Thailand, they're in Vietnam, they're throughout the region. Processing, of course, is always the more challenging element. And in terms of how Australia works with the region and indeed with the world, we have an excellent example with Lynas at the moment, where the lithium is mined in Australia, it's processed in Malaysia, it's exported to China and other markets in the world. Now that's an existing setup, it's working well. It continues to be an example, I think, for what we can see forward in whether the processing takes place in the region or whether it takes place in Australia or indeed the United States. All of these are possibilities. All of these are open to us today, and the fact that the governments are engaging with it is a very good and positive sign to show the robustness of the economy when the governments want to focus on opportunities. The private sector is always there to respond to the needs. So I think Australia and the region can work very well together on critical minerals, but on many other different elements of the global supply chain where we have complementary economies and skills, and certainly the capital is available.
Certainly feels that there's a lot of growth to be had in that industry and a lot of attention coming day by day. So it'll be interesting to see over the coming weeks and months what we see come out of all of these deals and then the future business engagement as well. As you look at ASEAN writ large, right, we see a diverse series of markets that, while there's been efforts to try and unify in many ways, have unique characteristics. So I guess the question to you is, when you look and when you think about the region now, how is Australia trying to prioritize and find the markets that best align with its comparative advantage? And are there areas that you see as kind of future opportunities that haven't been as fruitful yet?
Yep. Well, I mean, it's important to make the point you did initially, that the region is Australia's second largest trading partner. So a lot has been achieved already, and there is a great, when I put this report together, the businesses of the region and the governments of the regions emphasised how much they valued Australia as a reliable, long-term supplier of not just commodities, of energy, but also education. That was, very much highlighted. Now, the Prime Minister personally, you can see his endorsement on the report when it was released in Jakarta 2 years ago. He updated it at the Asian leaders meeting in Vientiane last year, and this morning, today in Kuala Lumpur, he then endorsed it and gave an update in terms of where it was at. So the Prime Minister and the Foreign Minister have got a real commitment to this story of increasing two-way trade and investment. This is a core part of the government's policy. So coming into office, the first visit the Prime Minister made was to Jakarta. This has been, very high in terms of the agenda. And as a result of that, as I said, you can see 50 of 75 recommendations being implemented. In terms of the opportunities across the region, in our report we cover each country. As you say, each country is very different. Singapore, of course, one of the richest countries in the world. Not every country is as rich. Obviously, we have East Timor, Timor-Leste signing up yesterday. So there's quite a variety of countries in terms of different stages of development, and quite a variety of needs, whether it be in energy, whether it be in the critical minerals that you were mentioning before, whether it be in education. The point of Australia is that we've had a very open economy now for at least 50 years. So the companies that compete and operate in Australia are globally best at doing what they're doing, or they wouldn't be there. People have talked about the car industry and things like that. We don't have a car industry, we haven't had one for a while. We are very specialised. They have got a lot of skills to bring to the markets that they seek to operate in. So I don't think it's one size fits all. As you say, the economies are very different. We see, for example, Costa, one of our agricultural companies, is active in Laos in blueberries. That's one thing. We've got our logistics companies. We've got Linfox, and as well as that, we've got Toll, very active. Australia's good at logistics. They're active in logistics across the region. They've made new investments in the region. We've got our health companies, obviously world's best health companies, active in the region, looking at developments in Indonesia and other places. So a whole range of different companies. Here in Malaysia, we have dozens of Australian manufacturing companies working with their businesses between Australia and Malaysia in terms of developing sophisticated products such as ResMed and Cochlear that are leading products in their market niches globally, being built with Australian technology, Malaysian manufacturing and combination. So there's every possible combination out there. But your key point to start off with is critically important. There's not one size fits all. Every country has different operation, different strengths, and as the Australian companies come, it's what they have to do is focus on what they can bring to these markets, what they can utilise in terms of the resources and the skills available with the people in the different countries.
Well, Nicholas, thank you so much for taking some time to be with us today.
Great pleasure.
This was a really informative and helpful conversation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Adam. Thank you all very much for your attention.